Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're really happy that you made it today. We love having a full room like this, and we're appreciative that people came out despite the snow, which in DC, if you live here, you know is such a big deal, right? Coming from New England, it's definitely a different deal for me, but it has been interesting living in DC for the last few years. So thank you all for joining us here today, both in the room and via our live stream. Our hashtag for today is Broadband Ready. If you're looking for Wi-Fi, you can hop onto Brookings. You have to put in your info. They'll send you a password, and then you can hop on the Wi-Fi. My name is Deb Soch. I'm the Executive Director for Next Century Cities, and we're a nonprofit membership organization that helps cities, towns, and counties to ensure that all of their residents have access to fast, affordable, and reliable broadband. Having the infrastructure, as well as the ability to support adoption, is important to local leaders. And the work is really hard. It's wonky, it's techy, and it changes overnight. That's why Next Century Cities exists, to help our cities find unbiased information, to help with networking, to educate state and federal legislators and commissioners about the struggles and successes at the local level. By the way, membership is free, so if you are a community and you're interested in joining, please go to nextcenturycities.org, and we'd be happy to connect with you. So though many resources do exist, our members were telling us that those resources do not exist in one place, that they often contain information that's outdated, and they struggle to determine which resources have veracity. Therefore, with the support of our sponsors, Neighborly and the Internet Society, we've worked for the past 6 months to create, curate, and collate credible resources. And we're not planning to stop here. This is an iterative resource. We'll be adding, subtracting, and updating the toolkit as new and important resources surface. Thank you to all the people and organizations in the room today who contributed to our toolkit. Our sponsors will be coming up in a few minutes to speak, but they are also contributors. So we have Garrett Brinker and Ava Aravuo from Neighborly. We have Mark Buell and Katie Watson from the Internet Society. But there are other people present today. We have Ryland Sherman, who is representing the Benton Foundation. We have Angelina Panettiere from the National League of Cities. We have Robert Galato from Purdue. Chris Mitchell, whose resources are very actively quoted in the toolkit, from Community Broadband Networks and the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. He is also Next Century Cities Policy Director. Yesterday at our event, Chris mentioned his podcast. I will mention it again. It actually is so important of a resource, and I highly recommend, if you're not listening to his podcast, that you should. We have Trinity Thorpe and Christina Wiskowski from Comcast Internet Essentials, and we have Tony Williams also from Comcast. We have Jim Baller and Mackenzie Schnell representing Baller, Stokes, and Lead. We have Anna Higgins, a former intern at Next Century Cities, who also wrote a blog piece for us. And there may be others in the room, and if I have missed you, I apologize. But we really appreciate all of your effort to help our members understand and know how to take action to support their communities. So I'd like to start right now by bringing up Garrett Brinker, the Director of Business Development from Neighborly, and he's going to share a few words.
Good afternoon, folks. First, I'd like to thank Next Century Cities for putting together this event, and especially for their impressive and dogged work on this toolkit over the past 6 months. The work that folks like Deb and Kat and Chris do to help hundreds of communities get access to fast, reliable, and affordable broadband, I think is really heroic. And I know all the folks at Neighborly are incredibly grateful for what you all do every day. And there's nothing that gives you more legitimacy with folks during initial introductory broadband meetings than mentioning one of your names. So thank you for that as well. So for folks that aren't familiar with Neighborly, we connect communities in capital through financing and building open access fiber optic infrastructure. We believe that fiber optic broadband networks are the 21st century bridges between our communities and economic opportunity. We particularly believe that open access networks provide equal and open access to the internet and unlock opportunities for new kinds of services like telehealth and smart cities applications that we haven't even dreamed of yet. They enhance educational opportunities, they create jobs, they boost local self-reliance and quality of life, and ultimately lower prices for subscribers. We embarked on this journey to create this toolkit with Next Century Cities sometime back last summer when it was a little warmer, there was less snow on the ground, and it was born out of collectively realizing that there are hundreds of communities from big coastal cities to rural prairie towns who are on a quest to really build a more connected future for themselves. But often these communities lack some of the policies, resources, and knowledge to really get these efforts moving. These gaps can be fatal to getting these broadband movements off the ground, and tragically often in the places where it's needed most. And there are so many communities out there who get it, who get the transformative potential for ubiquitous broadband, who know the economic impact that can have on businesses and property values, and who really understand it to be a crucial component of building more resilient and future-proof communities. They just need to know what to do next. They need to know what they're missing. They need to know who to turn to. And that's why and how this toolkit started to come together. Because it also feels like this toolkit is coming at exactly the right moment. At a time of perhaps unprecedented federal inaction, a digital divide, and a homework gap that's even further stratifying the haves from the have-nots, and a realization from cities and communities that they must find new and creative solutions for transformative initiatives to create inclusive and sustainable growth. A new localism of sorts, a movement championed by a renowned figure in this very building, Bruce Katz of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program. And so we're seeing a revolution in cities and towns, big and small, an understanding and realization that the future of our communities is in the actions that we take locally. And that part of that foundation is what we build, literally and figuratively, is fiber broadband infrastructure. So now city officials, community leaders, broadband champions have this crucial resource that's at their disposal, this Next Century Cities toolkit. And I've been fortunate enough to have gotten a number of early looks at the toolkit, and I'm quite excited, perhaps unreasonably excited about this, about how this is going to help all kinds of community leaders. It's helped identify the common threads that run through successful projects. It's established a rich library of trusted resources for further research, and it's clearly laid out and categorized crucial goals and means for success. And that's what's most powerful, is that much of what you'll read in the toolkit comes directly from cities themselves. We know that a community that's trying to do something transformative is most interested in learning from other communities who have already taken similar steps. And that's really where Next Century Cities binds us all together, that node, that trusted entity, that wealth of knowledge, who's collaborated with many of you to launch this toolkit today. So we at Neighborly are immensely proud to be a sponsor of the toolkit for Becoming Broadband Ready, and we hope and know that it's going to be a game-changing tool for so many communities that are on a path to build a more resilient, hopeful, and connected future. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. So I'm going to bring up Mark Buell, but just before I do, I want to mention that he did provide us with copies of this piece that I highly recommend you read. I will say I was on this trip. It was a really empowering and amazing opportunity. So now we're going to hear from Mark Buell, the Chief of the North Regional Bureau from the Internet Society. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Deb. And thank you to everyone here today. And also, Deb and team, congratulations. This is, I've seen the sneak peek of the toolkit, and it's incredible. I think it's a critical tool for helping to ensure that everyone everywhere has access to the internet. For those of you who don't know the Internet Society, we were founded in 1992 by the creators of the internet to ensure that everyone everywhere has access to a secure and trusted internet. And we do that through working with our 50,000 members worldwide, our 150 chapters and special interest groups worldwide, and by working with partners like Next Century Cities. We believe that the more voices we have, the more impact we can make, and the stronger we can all be. One of the things that we've realized over the past 27 years as an organization is that when people get access to the internet, amazing things can happen, be that through economic development, improved health outcomes, education opportunities. The list goes on and on. So that's why we count NCC as an important partner in our work. Deb mentioned the Indigenous Connectivity Summit that we recently held in Inuvik, Northwest Territories. What Deb didn't say is that we made her get on a plane and fly 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle and spend a few days with us in the high Arctic in Canada. But it was, as Deb says, it was a great event. I highly encourage you to get a copy of the report and read it. In the North American Regional Bureau of the Internet Society, we have responsibilities for the organization's activities in Canada and the United States. And while I think everyone in this room knows that there are many people in North America who are left offline at this point, it disproportionately affects Indigenous people in both Canada and the US. So we've spent the last 2.5 years working with a number of Indigenous organizations and communities to ensure that we can build a strong community to advocate for improved access in communities, but also a community of technical support so that it's more communities helping communities and communities helping each other, which is what I see the toolkit as doing. I think one thing we've learned in our 27 years of connecting communities is that when a network is driven by the community, for the community, and in the community, it's much more sustainable, it's much more successful. And tools are what's needed. Capacity building is what's needed at the community level. And that's where we see the toolkit come in. So with the toolkit, moving forward, we want to work more closely with NCC because we have the shared goal of ensuring that everyone is connected. We're planning the 2019 Indigenous Connectivity Summit. Mark your calendars. First 2 weeks of October, this time in a much warmer place than Inuvik was. We're going to Hawaii. So Deb, it won't be a trip to the high Arctic, but Hawaii's not so bad. Again, congratulations. This is a great event, and I hope to have some conversations with everyone in the room after the event.
I have to say, though Hawaii sounds lovely, I wouldn't trade it for Inuvik because I learned so much when I was there. So next we're going to hear from Kat Blake, who many of you know is the Program and Policy Manager at Next Century Cities. And she's going to come up and give us an overview of the toolkit. But before she takes the mic, I want to thank the whole Next Century Cities team that worked on it. And that includes Chris Mitchell, Jess DiFiacco, who is watching from Minnesota. Hi, Jess. And of course, Kat. And I'd like to take a moment to uplift the amazing work that Kat did to bring all the resources in this toolkit together. The whole team may have contributed, but it was Kat's extraordinary effort that really made it happen. So I want to thank her publicly for all she has done and ensure that this toolkit is both comprehensive and cohesive and useful to everyone who is a part of the network. So Kat, come on up, please.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Deb, for that lovely introduction. As Deb mentioned, my name is Kat Blake, and I'm the Policy and Program Manager here at Next Century Cities, and I'm really excited to be presenting Becoming Broadband Ready today. And before we dive into the toolkit, I'd like to just reiterate Deb's thanks to Neighborly and the Internet Society, not just for their support, but also for their enthusiasm, to all of our allies in the room whose work has really strengthened this toolkit, and to our Next Century Cities member communities whose leadership in connecting their own communities has really paved the way for this work. And I'd also like to thank all of my colleagues at Next Century Cities for their wonderful work in making this resource happen. So this toolkit was conceptualized as a resource that could help any local leader to encourage broadband investment in their community. And there isn't one perfect model for connectivity that will work in every community, but there are certainly common threads that run through successful projects themselves, even if those projects might look different from one another. So an island community of a couple hundred people and a large metro center might have different broadband plans, but things like passionate local leadership, strong community engagement, and clear and well-organized permitting practices can certainly benefit everyone. So Becoming Broadband Ready compiles all of these common threads into one place so that any local leader who does want to improve access can have a place to start. And the toolkit includes a variety of topics, such as determining goals for success or goals for access, evaluating your current circumstance, your municipal assets, and the demand that exists in your community, the legislative barriers that you might face depending on the state that you live in, different network models, financing options, and how to measure your success, and many more. So I'm going to take a little bit of time now to go over the toolkit itself and a few of its key features. The toolkit is available on nextcenturycities.org under the Resources tab on our main menu. And if you're joining us in person today, there is a one-pager in your attendee packet, and that includes a little QR code that will take you directly to the full toolkit online if you'd like to follow along. So what I'll say first about the toolkit is that our team really intentionally made a decision to build this out online as a web page. As Deb mentioned, we intend for this to be a living and dynamic document that can be updated well into the future. So as everyone in this room and everyone who's listening, I'm sure knows really well, this landscape is always changing. Small cell deployments themselves are a great example of how technology can change things for a community. And in the past couple of months alone, the FCC has passed a new small cell order. The USDA has firmed up a new rural broadband program, and those are just a couple of examples, and they're both things that we've been able to address in this toolkit. And we want to make sure that this toolkit can respond to changes like these so that communities can go to it for the most up-to-date information possible. Another thing I'd like to note is that there is a PDF version of this toolkit that accompanies the web page. You can access that at the top of the page here. And there is a note that indicates when this was last updated. So we're hoping to update this often and well into the future. And you can know that if you do download the PDF, the changes will be reflected in both the PDF and the toolkit, so you'll always be getting the most up-to-date information. So in terms of the actual elements of the toolkit, we've broken each of these common threads into a different section. And you can navigate through those sections through this sidebar that will stay with you as you scroll. And because each of these sections is a building block, there are a lot of different ways they can be organized, and not everyone will want to start in the same place. So we talked a lot as a team about the order of these threads that made the most sense, and ultimately the consensus was that there are a bunch of different ways these could be ordered. So we put them in an order that we think makes sense, with some basic considerations at the beginning about leadership and groundwork, and then more nuanced policies as you move on. Another feature about the toolkit that I'd like to point out is the reading lists that are at the end of each section. So there are so many detailed resources that we could have included and written a lot about in the toolkit, but it was important to us that the text remained as digestible as possible. So we elected to keep the sections a little bit shorter and then to include specific reading lists for each topic in each section. Additionally, each section includes a checklist of action steps that a community could consider. And these checklists were designed so that this toolkit could go a little bit beyond being just a document, and that it could be used as a real planning tool for communities. In addition to the checklist at the end of each section, there is a full checklist at the end that compiles each section into a full Next Century Communities checklist. So I'll just go over one of these sections briefly to give everyone an idea of how these elements come together. And I'm going to talk a little bit about established policies and procedures to support investment. So this is actually one of our text-heavier sections, but it's a great example of how we tried hard to link as many resources as we could and include direct access to local solutions to a lot of these issues. So we start here with the Dig Once section, and this section first breaks down the benefits of Dig Once to a community. But you can see that we've linked a lot of different resources here, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first is so that if you want to learn more about what we're talking about, you can do so. And the second is that these resources could be available to a community, maybe as an asset as they work to advocate for some of these policies. Another thing I'd like to point out is that we linked to as many local ordinances as possible. So here we talk a little bit about Santa Monica, California's public right-of-way ordinance that was enacted close to 20 years ago, and we've linked directly to the city code there. So if you're interested in this and you think it might be helpful to your community, you can access the direct text. At the end of the Dig Once section, we have a further reading list that is specific to Dig Once, and so if you're interested in learning more about this, you have 2 episodes of Chris Mitchell's podcast, a blog by a city engineer, and a report by CTC Technology and Energy, so you can get more information. If we move on to One Touch Make Ready, we talk about how this policy can streamline deployment in communities and lower costs. But we noted that if you're thinking about implementing this policy in your community, it's important that you also know about specific pole attachment regulations. So we've cross-referenced that section, and it'll take you directly to learn more information about specific pole attachment regulations, including some Next Century Cities resources that probably look very familiar to some people in the room. We also include information about template lease agreements. And here we talk about how having a template lease agreement ready to go can be really beneficial to a community so that they're informed and ready to react when someone does approach them and is interested in leasing their fiber or other assets. So here we have included example template lease agreements from many communities. So if you're just starting out with this, you have a great springboard. We also talk about simplified permitting practices and how simple and predictable process for infrastructure permitting can help encourage vendor investment. And here we highlight Huntington Beach, California, who worked with several wireless providers in order to develop pre-approved small cell designs for their community. So they worked collaboratively with providers to design these small cell designs, and they're publicly available, and if a vendor approaches the city with applications and their small cell design matches those that already exist on their website, they're going to have an expedited permitting process, and this benefits both the city and the provider for a much smoother deployment. And so we have linked directly to those guidelines, and you can actually see what exactly those small cell designs look like. Oh, that's the city of Denver. Apologies. But they are also here. So you can take a look at what exactly that looks like. So we just tried to make all of these resources as accessible as possible so that cities could really learn from successful practices of other cities. So this is just one example of a section from the toolkit. There are many, many more, and we do hope that you take the time to explore them. This resource is online, and it's free, and it's open to the public, and we encourage all of you to share it widely and to send us your feedback and your ideas so that we can continue to develop this resource well into the future. So with that, thank you, and I'd like to bring up our panel of local leaders for a discussion.
I would like to also just say a word about the toolkit. Kat really did great work on it, did the vast majority of it. If you find any mistakes in there, those were my contributions. I like to throw in some things to keep people on their toes. I'm Chris Mitchell, and I am having a little bit of a sinus issue. Pro tip, if you're going to give a series of public speaking engagements, don't tackle the dirtiest corner of your basement 2 days before. So, learning lessons here. As Deb had said, I'm with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I do put out the Community Broadband Bits podcast. Don will be the guest next week, so I'm not going to spoil some of those tidbits you gave me.
That'll be exciting.
So I'm going to introduce the panel here. We're going to have a very discussion-oriented approach, but I'll start with Dr. Robert Wack, accomplished author, who is a city council president for Westminster, Maryland. Welcome, Dr. Wack. We have McLean Bryant Macklin, director of policy and research for the Greater Kansas City Civic Council. And as I said, Don Patton, general manager for MyNet, which is in Monmouth and Independence in Oregon. So the first thing I wanted to ask each of you, and I think I'll throw it to Dr. Wack first since I introduced you first, is to tell us a little bit about what's happening in your community, just so everyone has a sense as we talk about lessons learned and how you've done other things, they know what your city has done and how it might be relevant to their community. Yeah, so in your case, tell us about the public-private partnership you established.
So we started building a municipally owned, community-wide fiber optic network about 4 years ago, and we chose a public-private partnership model to provide the services, and we went through a process to identify the appropriate partner and settled on a company called Ting, who they came out of domain name registration and then went into cellular service, and now they have an fiber internet service. And they are our partner. That's condensing about 4 years of history into 3 sentences. Today we have about 100 miles of conduit constructed, a little bit less in terms of backbone fiber installed. We will be finished major construction this year. And we have been hitting, since the beginning of the project, all of our milestones in terms of project cost, timeline, and subscriber take rate. Still a long way to go, but we're very happy with the progress we've made so far.
And just very briefly, what's Westminster like? Is it part of the Baltimore metro area?
Westminster is a formerly rural agricultural town. We are the county seat for Carroll County. Carroll County sits west and north of Baltimore and due north of Washington, D.C. So if you get on 16th Street and you just start driving north, about an hour and a half later, you're in Westminster. And so it's transitioned over the years, and it became a bedroom community. Our major employers have always been the usuals for bedroom communities in formerly rural areas: the hospital, the school system, and local government. And then it drops off very quickly after that. And we have no other major physical assets there in terms of major highways, major rail lines. There are no rivers. We don't have a big body of water. We're just a little town plonked down in the middle of what used to be a bunch of cornfields and are now sprawling residential developments. So about 2/3 of our community gets up in the morning and gets in their car and drives to Baltimore, Washington, Columbia, Northern Virginia. And that's not real great for local economic development. All of our smartest people, most talented, the ones with the greatest ideas, all leave. So we wanted to do something that was a game changer, that literally changed the map. And so that's how we settled on the fiber project as being the most feasible thing that we could accomplish as a small or small municipality.
Thank you. So I want to move on to Kansas City, which, if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to watch the Super Bowl as they become the next Super Bowl champions. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with your project.
unpushed. We were we were the first Google Fiber community along with Kansas City, Kansas. And so we were fortunate to have that free fiber connectivity. And we underwent the calculus of whether or not to deploy city-owned broadband infrastructure. But because of our land mass, we're 319 square miles, and our population, which is just under 500,000. So you compare it to San Francisco, which has a comparable population, but they're in like 8 square miles. So we just don't have the density. So it didn't make sense from a cost analysis standpoint. I guess in terms of the project, I'm sorry, can you describe?
I guess what I'd really like to know is, it's been 8 years-ish. What's changed?
So from Google Fiber and from rolling that out and even just going through the process of working with Google Fiber to deploy it, we were it showed a light on the digital divide in Kansas City. I don't think digital divide was even a term back then, but Google Fiber came into the city and had these series of sign-up events so that residents could show their interest in having Google Fiber once it was deployed. And if you look at the map of the neighborhoods where that interest was shown, that map overlaid with the map of like our lowest socioeconomic and our elderly population would have been like an exact match, because we saw that people in our poorest communities either most commonly they couldn't afford Google Fiber. But there was also a lack of appreciation in those neighborhoods and others, and most predominantly in our senior communities, about the value of fiber connectivity to their lives. And so we kind of had to backtrack and rethink our approach, and had to engage in an educational endeavor to explain to folks how this could, not only like make them competitive amongst, just regular people in this 21st century economy, but how it would help them and their children elevate to the next level for generations to come. So there was a bi-state coalition that formed from this work. There were a handful of stakeholders that really took charge of tackling this issue. And this is common knowledge now, but our libraries, a handful of ISPs, municipalities really got together and met monthly to discuss what everyone was doing or individually to move the needle, but also talk about what we could do collectively to move the needle as well.
Thank you. And Don, we're going to get a sense of what's going on in Monmouth and Independence from you. Don wasn't there at the beginning, but he can describe the motivations for the original project and what he's done to change the project.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you all for being here and the opportunity to talk with you today. MyNet, which, by the way, don't do a search on MyNet by itself without your safe search on. Actually, I don't know how they ever came up with that acronym. MyNet actually stands for Monmouth Independence Network. Monmouth and Independence is 2 communities, quite small communities, about 10,000 population each. In the Willamette, and that's how you do pronounce it, the Willamette Valley of Oregon. We're about 45 minutes from the Pacific Ocean. We're about 45 minutes from Portland, and we're about 10 minutes from the state capital of Salem. We're also about 45 minutes from Eugene if you're a Ducks fan. MyNet is a result of the 2 cities coming together and creating a municipal fiber optic network to every single address in the 2 communities. It came about because of the same old story that we've heard and tossed around for years. Is the incumbents were approached to not leave our 2 communities out of the future, and we got the response that every community that's represented in this room has heard, and that is, we'll tell you when you need broadband, and we'll deliver it when we feel like it. And that just wasn't an acceptable answer. MyNet is about 12 years old. It's struggled for about the first 6 years, quite frankly, because of over borrowing. We have since that time turned it around to make it quite efficient, very effective. We enjoy a 85+% penetration rate in our 2 communities. And more importantly, we hang on to that penetration rate. As a result, we've attracted the interest of institutional investors, and we are now actually underway in expanding our footprint, really actually doubling our footprint into an adjoining community of about 18,000 people.
That's a great summary. So I think one of the places to start is one of the things that Next Century Cities really focuses on, and that's collaboration. And so I'd like to dig a little bit further into how each of you has to collaborate with a significant partner in the project. For you, Robert, that would obviously be Ting. For Kansas City, with McLean, it would be Fiber, Google Fiber, and then Don, I was thinking for you, it would actually be the cities, because I don't think you see yourself as necessarily part of that bureaucracy. Dr. Wack, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you collaborate to make this project about more than just the people on the city council that support it and the ISP you're working with.
So I guess I would start by saying it's a work in progress. It is, like all relationships, something that evolves over time, and we're still learning about each other, and there are, bumps and swerves, but from the very beginning, and one of the main reasons we picked Ting during our process is they were very open to a shared risk, shared reward sort of model of our partnership. And that is built into the bones of our agreement. And the negotiating process was very collaborative and very open. Unlike some of the other entities that we were vetting, they were very open with us about sharing their cost models, and we, in turn, were open sharing ours, what the assumptions we were making, et cetera, et cetera. And so that made for a very productive and efficient negotiation, because everybody was putting their cards on the table and were being very open about what they needed out of the relationship. So we got off to a very good start because of that. Since then, it's been this sort of ongoing sorting process of what the division of labor is between the city and Ting in terms of the construction, the maintenance, handling calls, marketing, and then in terms of marketing, the different kinds of marketing the service, marketing the fiber, marketing the community. And as you can imagine, all of these things sort of shade into each other, and it gets a little complicated. And so sometimes there are misunderstandings, and we thought you were going to do that. I thought you were going to do that. So, but we work it out, and it's moving forward, and it's a great relationship. And I wish I could tell you that I knew a way to replicate that for everything. I think a lot of it was just the people in the room at the time, and it just worked out. But there are some common themes about transparency and collaboration and risk sharing.
Thank you. So, any lessons that you learned in terms of negotiating with Google Fiber? I don't even know if you were a part of the original team that had to do it in utter secrecy, code words and other things.
I wasn't. Those negotiations preceded me, but I kind of fell, neck high into it once I joined the mayor's staff. In case it's confusing at all, up until last week, I was the policy director for Mayor James of Kansas City, and I took a new position with the Civic Council. So, one lesson learned was that Google Fiber offered us 300 free community connections, and we allocated those to government buildings, schools, and libraries, which seemed like a great idea at the time, and it was. But some years later, we learned that Austin had allocated their free community connections to their public housing units, which would have been great to have included them in our 300. Google, though, was nice to us because we had some 60 left over of the 300, and so we were able to renegotiate. And what we did was we put them open for competitive bid for public housing facilities, for nonprofits that provide digital inclusion services, and then just through that RFP, I guess, selected those that would have had the greatest impact with that free service. Google Fiber has also been a tremendous partner in our battle against the digital divide. I think that they were a large part of why we were selected as an initial Connect Home community. They then connected 7 of our 21 public housing facilities for free to fiber. They also outfitted community learning labs within those facilities and provided training twice a week for the residents. So it's been a worthwhile partnership.
And Don, do you want to describe your relationship with the municipalities? And do you see yourself as somewhat distinct from them?
I probably shouldn't cuss that much up here. I have 2 city councils, 2 mayors, to which essentially MyNet reports to. And I could go on for hours about all the failed attempts to have a strong working relationship with city councils and mayors. I'm not going to be able to get that done for you. But what I think the point I would stress today is that even if it's a municipally owned operation like we are, a city has to come to the realization that, in our case, MyNet is not a utility. It is not a monopoly. It is in competition in the for-profit business world, and it needs to be operated exactly like a for-profit entity. So if there's a tendency for the city, and there always is to want to maintain operational control of a for-profit business, it's probably not going to work out very well. Once we were able to wrestle away operational control and operate it like a for-profit business, that's when we turned MyNet around immediately from being on the very edge of the cliff, to be quite frank with you, to becoming operationally profitable. So much so that we attracted the attention of institutional investors to take advantage of our excess capacity in our head end, to take advantage of our efficiencies, and to hope to also replicate our effectiveness based on our penetration rate and grow it for us.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on?
Please.
So I feel your pain, but I'm on this side of the table. So what Don is describing is exactly why we chose the model that we did, because we sort of knew that it would head in that direction. And then there's another dynamic there that he experienced that we've also wrestled with, which is unfortunately public sector entities, local governments, whatever, look at private partners as somebody to be squeezed. That you get them, they want something you have, and so you squeeze them and squeeze them and you squeeze them until they scream and bleed, and then you squeeze them some more. And that's not a good way to run a partnership, if it's really going to be a partnership. And that is something that we struggled with, we collectively, trying to break from that habit of treating a private partner as somebody that you're just going to get as much from as possible, because if they don't like it, they'll leave and you get another one. Well, that doesn't work with fiber. So anyway,
I appreciate that.
If I may jump on that, I don't want to leave you with the impression that I don't feel that a municipally owned operation is not the best route to go. Every route that can work is the best route to go, including municipally owned. But I would caution any city or group of cities that are looking at the municipally owned model is to go in with the commitment not to make this entity a political football.
Yes.
You'll be successful, but you have to have a very, in my circumstances, and I'm sure this is true, you have to have a very, very strong operation that can buck the natural tendencies, as you were describing, of the cities.
I think that's one of the things that we try to emphasize in Next Century City, this idea of the many different models. There is no one model. Next Century City spans most of the country. Most of the states are represented among our members. And it is definitely true that what works for one does not work for all the others. So this is absolutely a core lesson of using what will work with local culture, local law, and other local factors. I want to come back to digital inclusion, though, and in particular in Kansas City, where you face a particular challenge. You have, it's interesting to me because I come from St. Paul, where one of our challenges is in the schools, the kids speak a lot of different languages, and that leads to challenges for education and an achievement gap. Now, in Kansas City, you have a high rate of poverty. You don't really have as much of a language barrier in the same way, but the poverty is very high. And so I'm curious what creative ways you've come to try to get that digital inclusion really going, since you've identified it as such a key issue.
Yeah, so we have 16 independent school districts in Kansas City, which creates its own challenge. And getting any one of them on board is an effort in love. The Kansas City Public Schools, which is our primary public school district, they were a Connect Ed school. And so they were an early adopter of a lot of our digital inclusion efforts, particularly after they realized that although these kids had connectivity at school and they had the equipment to use at home in terms of the laptop or the tablet, they didn't have connectivity at home. And so it was a natural partnership to try to bridge that gap. The city and the library had some pretty early on conversations with Sprint. I think Sprint was looking for an avenue to enter into the digital inclusion conversation, but also to get some lifelong customers signed on early. And so they started the 1 Million Project. I don't know if everyone in the room is familiar with that, but Kansas City was one of the first cities to benefit from that as well. It's been a challenge, and it's a constant effort to get the other school districts involved in the coalition. We try to, speak their languages and put it in terms that they understand. But for some reason, there's a lot of competition and some bad blood between that public governmental entity and the city. I think because they are separate, whereas in some cities the mayor has control over the school board and we just don't. But we just have to keep at it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to highlight was this collaborative nature of having meetings in which people that previously did not meet together, even in an unstructured way, to discuss their problems. That's happening now.
Yeah, and so there are the monthly meetings that are really driven by our library. The founding members of our coalition were the two municipalities over in the Unified Government of Wyandotte County and then Kansas City, Missouri, and the Mid-Continental Library, which is the library district for our more rural counties. And so they pretty much set the schedules and keep it going and just kind of badger the others to keep them involved. We've gotten our Federal Reserve involved now. For the longest time, we were saying, I think it was Dallas that issued the guidance that the Community Redevelopment Act money could be used toward digital inclusion. And we assembled all of our CRA managers in the city, and they were really not trying to hear us. They were like, yeah, we have historically been giving this money toward other things, and we're going to keep doing that. But once we got our local Federal Reserve on board, everybody else fell into line. So that's been helpful to have the funding that, because there's so much good we want to do, but with finite resources and digital inclusion being a relatively new problem, it's been hard to even get the city's housing department on board to use CDBG. And
Community Development Block Grants.
Yes, which is, HUD has been, HUD 2012 to 16 HUD.
That's right.
was a great partner in this battle, and really went to great lengths to make funding available to tackle digital inclusion. Now we're just trying to figure it out on our own by using the fees from our small cell attachments toward digital inclusion, and just finding other ways to fund the work.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to reiterate something, because I'm not sure if anyone outside of Garrett Nava caught the Federal Reserve discussion, which is incredibly important just for people. The Federal Reserve banks are out of Dallas, which you mentioned, are publishing several papers now about the digital divide and what banks can do. People like us don't have to understand that, but we need to direct our banks to read those materials. And so we can look those up and pass them on to the local banks to get them more involved in these projects. Yes, right. So,
could I tag on to what you just said? Because I was thinking that one of the perks of being municipally owned, by the way, is that those profit dollars that we generate, the city now has the ability to use those dollars for at their discretion, and whether it's to reduce the tax implications on all of us as residents, or if it is, as is the case in our communities, we're already starting to discuss how they'll be used to address the digital divide, so that we're not at the mercy of the Federal Reserve and not at the mercy of the FCC or anyone else. We'll take care of ourselves. Thank you.
So I wanna jump into magic. Whenever we talk about this, is something that Westminster is doing, and I have to admit, whenever I think of it, I think about the character Job from Arrested Development and this dramatic maybe dove flying out of his coat or something like that. But tell us what magic is in Westminster and what it's accomplishing.
How am I going to live up to that?
You don't have flash paper on you?
MAGIC stands for the Mid-Atlantic Gigabit Innovation Collaboratory, and what it is sort of the next step in the economic development effort that the fiber is the foundation for. It is primarily funded by the City of Westminster and staffed by one full-time person and then another half-time person, and then the rest, it's all volunteers. And the goal is to create and nurture entrepreneurs focused in technology, and particularly around broadband, to create new job opportunities, new companies, attract new companies, develop new technologies in our community driven by our fiber infrastructure. It started off as kind of a pie-in-the-sky idea, looking at a lot of what's going on in Kansas City, in Chattanooga. We said we want some of that action, but we're not Kansas City, we're not Chattanooga. We don't have the mass or the resources to replicate exactly how things were going in those communities. So we sort of did it ourselves and started putting together some programs and projects that very quickly, and this was unforeseen, all those people that get up and leave the community every morning, many of them are IT professionals or technologists. And as word of mouth spread about what we were doing, people started approaching us and saying, whoa, I didn't know that was happening in our community. I want to be involved in that. So one example of the programs that we do is a beginner level cybersecurity competition in a capture the flag format that Next Century Cities has helped sponsor, and some other folks. And we're basically out in the schools. It's high school and college kids, but we've even had adults who were looking to change careers, pick up some cybersecurity skills, and hopefully take the next step and enroll in our local community college in their cyber program. We've had some people demonstrate enough proficiency that they went right into some of our local companies. So it's a sort of workforce development, but with a technology, cyber, broadband kind of focus. Another project that we're doing is a Healthy Smart Home project, which connects 2 homes out in our community that are hooked to the fiber project. We're putting in sensors, some software platforms, and these homes are managed by a local nonprofit that does residential services for adults with disabilities. They have lots of medical problems. They go to the emergency room a lot, and it's a very obvious, immediate problem that needs some sort of solution. So we're trying to apply telehealth technology and, again, using the fiber network to make those folks' lives better and reduce their healthcare consumption and keep them healthier. And we've made some interesting progress on that. So back to so Magic is about basically stirring the kettle in our community, getting some interesting technology projects going, drawing attention to our community as a emerging technology hub, even as little as we are, and hopefully, create some new opportunities for our young people because of the fiber network.
And I like the term magic. We've got a little magic happening in Kansas City too.
It's Andy Reid.
A couple of years ago, we adopted a digital equity strategic plan, and the bulk of that work was educating our various city departments about their role in bridging the divide. And so, when we talked to our director of public health, we had to talk about impacts on health outcomes. When we talked to our Department of Public Works, we had to talk about, basically how they were in and of themselves a huge barrier, and how we needed to streamline the permitting process and, maybe reduce some fees or try to find ways to be easier to work with, given the unique way of having to do things in order to deploy broadband or for small cell attachments. It was even an educational exercise for our members of council, who were asking to adopt by resolution this strategy to work toward over the course of 5 years. And, they're thinking in terms of basic needs and snow removal and public safety. And so we had to put it in terms of, a public safety issue, or in terms of, this is a growing basic need. And while you might not appreciate that everybody needs to have the internet at home, or you might not even appreciate that folks don't, you might assume that they do. We had to start at that baseline and get everybody educated on how this is an issue before we could talk about how to solve it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk briefly about something that I think is really important in the toolkit, along with everything else in the toolkit. But one of the things that is neglected in my experience in many municipal projects is measuring the right things and trying to evaluate the right things. Now, when I talked with you yesterday, Don, on the hot mic, you knew your take rate to a decimal point. And so I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about how you went about measuring as you were turning the network around, and what's measuring for success?
Oh, golly.
The kind of question a good moderator poses in advance and doesn't spring on a panel at the last second.
Yeah. Well, Business 101, if you have any business acumen at all, you got to know exactly how many dollars you got coming in, exactly how many dollars you got going out, and exactly how many dollars you can actually go out and get. MyNet, Monmouth Independence Networks, rather, I did what I think a number of early implementers of municipally owned networks did, and that had the attitude that if you build it, they will come. And that just ain't the case. We had to go out and gather every single one of our customers and figure out how to keep them with basically a comparable product, except for our bandwidth capabilities, because we are 100% fiber to the home. We can play with anybody in speeds. But the video is the seller, and that's what you got to attract customers with. And we have not the finest video in the world compared to some of our competitors. And telephone is telephone. So we simply applied true business acumen, and that goes back to what I said earlier. To be successful at this, you have to treat it what it is, and that is a competitive business enterprise. One thing that I did want to, I'm going to back you up. I'm sorry, Chris, and I know you don't like to do that, but I was sitting here thinking as you were talking. A couple of things that I want to mention, because we have the ability to make the decisions for ourselves. Monmouth and Independence unfortunately also enjoys a between 60 and 65% reduced or free lunch program for our students. And I believe that, I stand corrected here, but I believe we are the largest independent school district in Oregon. So we're talking a substantial number of kids. And we had the opportunity to develop the first teledentistry clinic, which is serving the students of our school district. And we made the decision, because we could, as to how we were going to build out to this entity, knowing that it would be an absolute bandwidth pig. We took fiber directly into the facility. Now, another example that I wanted to bring up is that during the state mandated testing last year, we decided we would open up our pipes entirely to the school, and they were doing testing for their students. And our school district was the only school district in the state that didn't get bogged down or kicked off while they were doing the testing. And yeah, our customers were slowed down, but we notified them up front what we were doing, and everybody was okay with it.
I think we need 30 more seconds on the teledentistry. Just the doctor is very interested.
What would you like to know?
Well, I think I'd like to know. I think the most interesting thing is not just the fact that these kids are able to get more rapid appointments and have simple cavities filled easily, but what is the actual impact? How does it change the community? Which is to say, why does it matter?
Well, it's no different than being fed. Healthcare and dentistry is no different than any other form of healthcare. In fact, maybe it's more important when you're talking about youth than adults, because youth are naturally healthy, but their teeth aren't so much the case. It matters because we're taking care of what we're supposed to do as a society, in my opinion.
I think that's a very good answer. So I want to talk a little bit about financing. Actually, take that back. I want to go back forward to where we got rewound for some very good points by Don. And I'd like to ask about measuring success and what sort of things you think cities should think about measuring. Whether you did it or not, have you learned lessons about what you'd like to measure when you're doing these kinds of projects?
So I wish I had the opportunity to look up the exact figures, but we were required as a part of Connect Home to measure our outcomes. And I can tell you definitively that the internet connectivity of residents of public housing was close to zero when we started, and it was closer to like 80%, I want to say, once we finished. For those in the facilities, I'm not talking about like scattered sites, because Connect Home didn't really cover Section 8 voucher recipients. The city also made some pretty vast commitments of its own. We, as part of our digital equity strategy, wanted to tackle the equipment affordability issue. And so we became eSteward certified, which is the highest e-waste standard internationally, and then committed to donating all of our surplus equipment to an organization called Surplus Exchange, which was an e-waste recycling and refurbishing nonprofit. And so we now have upwards of 4,000 former city laptops and computers in the homes of income qualifying residents. We made them available for purchase, $50 for a desktop and $75 for a laptop, because our research showed that there has to be some kind of buy-in for folks to really appreciate what they're getting. We created a program called Digital Scholars, which was a workforce development program in partnership with our local arm of our state workforce development agency. We used, I think it was WIOA dollars to provide paid apprenticeships for residents of public housing to work for our digital equity stakeholders. So those that were providing the skills training, or Surplus Exchange, which was triaging and refurbishing computers. So they had a 10-week on the job or paid on the job training in a tech related field, that they could then go back to their public housing facility and teach others. And so that resulted in, I think it was 5 FTEs in the first year, and we only had 7 organizations participating, so that was, a pretty good outcome. But we are overdue for doing a second round of analysis and providing an update to council, because they want to know that that we're actually moving the needle in the areas that we're aiming to.
So for Westminster, sort of a blend of those two things. For the project itself, the construction, it's the usual, municipal big construction project metrics, budget, timeline. And then in terms of the network, the take rate is obviously, that's the bottom line for where your revenue is coming from. Another metric that inside the city we're watching is the amount of the subsidy from the general fund to our fiber fund. So the fiber project is in now its own enterprise fund, the fiber fund. But because this project is so big and has such a long ramp up, there's a subsidy from the general fund to the fiber fund during the construction, and there will be for several more years. But everybody's looking very closely at the size of that. Is it getting bigger or smaller? And then in terms of network operations, this is where that division of labor between us and Ting sometimes gets a little blurry, because it's the city's fiber, so we are responsible for outages, cuts, restoration, but obviously it creates network downtime, so they're responsible for being the customer's point of contact for that. So sometimes there's a little bit of tension there about like who should be doing what, but it's generally working very well. And a perfect example is we just last week had a catastrophic cut of one of our 288 strand backbones. It looked like it was mauled by a shark or something. It was just completely trashed by one of our utilities doing some underground work. But they had, between us and Ting and our fiber contractor, we had it restored in 8 hours, which it was the first big one we've had, and they handled it pretty well.
So, and I'll add just in terms of our infrastructure, we now have Google Fiber access to every home and every neighborhood, although there's not been adoption at every house. I had another data point and I lost it in my head.
To clarify, is you mean everyone that signed up originally, or is every neighborhood now served in the
every there is now Google Fiber, that's been laid, and it's accessible to homes. It's just that not everyone is subscribed to Google Fiber services.
Okay, because that was one of the criticisms originally, was that it was not going to pass everyone, but it has.
Well, the first thing that Google considered was where all they should lay fiber. And they were going to do that based on the responses that they got from those initial community engagement events that they had in, 4 quadrants of the city. They then dug a lot deeper, realizing that their outreach was insufficient, their messaging was off-putting, it didn't sufficiently describe, what folks could get out of this and what they would have to pay for it. Everybody's scared that it's going to be, prohibitively expensive to just lay the fiber, let alone subscribe. And so we had to work with them as a city on their messaging, and also who to reach out to. We're a city of neighborhood associations. We've got 400 and something neighborhood associations. And so in an effort like this, and 100 of them are very active. They will show up to your council meeting and raise a fuss. So, and Google Fiber wasn't, experiencing that. So, that was another way that the city was really able to help in the deployment, was to explain, the culture, as you said, and how to do business in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm going to add one other thing that we've completely forgotten. Yes, you do. We forgot to mention economic development. And Monmouth and Independent is a measurement tool. And aside from the social responsibility that the network can address, it's also creating an economic development environment that we've actually can attribute one new significant call center between 200 and 300 employees right now as a result of the broadband being in our community. But, and the example I wanted to bring up was we anticipate measuring this as well, that having broadband in our communities is going to create an environment where our young people aren't leaving the communities. And I want to share this with you because I think it validates that as a measuring tool. Do you know we have a university in our town. Western Oregon University is in our town. Oregon State University is 18 miles down the road, and as I mentioned earlier, the University of Oregon is 45 minutes down the road, and we have students of the parents who live in our communities that attend those two far-reaching schools, further out schools rather, come back on the weekends, not just to do their laundry, to pick a few bucks off of mom and dad, but to do their downloading at their home community and going back to school. That's a true measurement of success, if we can keep people from leaving our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lafayette, Louisiana ran their entire campaign on that premise of let's make sure our kids can stay here. I'm not sure that I would compare the cuisine of Monmouth and Independence to Lafayette, but. Do we have any questions? I think we had one here.
Yes, my name is James. Happy to hear that you included libraries. I was trained as a public librarian, children's librarian, but now but I've often been struck by the bringing those two anchor institutions together. Best practices or strategies or lessons learned.
And I'm just going to repeat that to make sure the microphone picked it up. But basically, how do we really engage the schools and the libraries to work together?
Yeah, I think we had to very gingerly suggest lanes. And because so many of our school districts were absent from the conversation and not really putting any effort forth, in some instances, the library was able to carve out its own. But the school district is really hamstrung for funding. I don't know if anybody follows the Kansas City Public Schools, but they were at risk of state takeover for a long time, and the funding mechanism, and I don't know exactly, but I think it has something to do with test scores and some other stuff, and they're underfunded because they're underperforming. I'll put it that way. So the library has been able to say, we can help you do things that you might want to do, but for one reason or another can't. So they do things like online GED prep, online ACT and ACT prep. They have all of their computers outfitted on the home screen with applications that assist with learning. And then they're able to make computers and the internet available for free for everyone, even outside of students. So I think just finding a lane and then offering assistance rather than encroachment is a good method.
And just a real brief, this is something I actually just learned relatively recently, is how profoundly different the cultures are between libraries and school systems. And there's a variety of very good reasons for that, but it translates into these very difficult problems of getting them to work together and coordinate. And I don't have any answers for you, other than to acknowledge that they're so different.
Yeah, and I think E-rate is, an area where you can find some common ground. Try to have a conversation where you're like, okay, well, you do this and you do that. But you've got to be very thoughtful about it.
Thank you. Additional questions? Nothing from Twitter today. One of the things I wanted to ask in a sort of cheeky way is whether you have any examples of good ways or bad ways of establishing leadership. One of the things that the toolkit talks about is the need to have a champion. And so I'm curious if you have any examples of how a champion emerged, or what happened if one didn't, or along those lines.
I'd be happy to start. So as the city, and with everybody else in the community thinking that we just print money as a governmental body, we had to carve out a lane for ourselves that wasn't limited to piggy bank. Because a lot of our stakeholders were like, we should handle programming, we should handle all of the great ideas, and we just need you to fund it. And we're like, no, there are other roles that we can play. For instance, our Public Works Department has a huge role in this. We have a huge advocacy role amongst, the region, but also on the state level and the federal level. So we had to really define ourselves instead of allowing others to define us for us. And that took 3 years because our library was very, very vocal and very involved. And for a long time, the city manager and mayor hadn't been focused on this issue. So there was a leadership void that the library stepped into. And they've been very, skilled and adept at it. But we still had to say, okay, well, but this is us. And by having a more holistic view of our community as the city, we were able to say, and we envision us all playing together and having these various roles, but what do you think? And what are you comfortable with? And what do you already have going on? And trying to be more of a team rather than like a hierarchy, like a flat structure.
Mr. Council President.
Lots of lessons learned, many of them bad ones, the wrong ones. So I guess real quickly, I would say that you have internal constituencies and you have external constituencies, and they both need continuous and active engagement and management. Because as soon as you lose sight of one group, the whole thing will turn on you. Yes often means maybe, and maybe often means no, and no often means you have to keep asking. And so you just have to keep on it, and cultivate, and you have to have a long view. You have to play the long game and just stay on it, because there will always be something that pushes you off, and you have to keep your eye on the long goal.
I'm of the attitude that leaders tend to come to the surface, or community leaders tend to come to the surface, community advocates. And if you're an operator, it's very important that you support these communities' leaders that do float to the top. Be very supportive in helping guide them to what they're trying to accomplish with their mission. As an example, in one of our communities, our economic development director was attempting to develop a relationship with Intel, utilizing resources in their city, and we lend our hand to lend credibility to the cities to bring broadband to whatever they were going to try to do together. So be supportive of one another, and your leaders will be successful.
I think that's a very good way to wrap up. So please join me in thanking the panel.
So I'm going to wrap up here real quickly. As Kat mentioned, the 3 different people you heard speaking today have 3 different models. They're 3 different towns, but there were commonalities. I think I will always use Don's line now. Every route that can work is the right route, right? So if it's working, it's a good decision. And it's not just infrastructure, it's adoption. It's complicated, but the outcomes are worth it. Leadership matters. Learn from each other. Be a good partner. Be transparent. Kansas City's digital inclusion efforts are in our toolkit. Information about the public-private partnership is in our toolkit. Information about the MyNet project and the municipal network, all in our toolkit. I have a feeling we'll be putting this podcast in our toolkit. So all really important things. I want to thank you all for being here today. A special thanks to our speakers and to Neighborly and the Internet Society, and a very special thanks to the over 100 communities whose works are represented in the toolkit. We do hope you will use it, you will contribute to it, and that you will ensure that every single resident across the country can obtain and successfully use fast, affordable, and reliable broadband. Thank you all very much.